is my footstool? Where is the house you will build for me? Where will my resting place be? Today we gather for a multitude of purposes. We gather to remember and honor Miss Sarah Catherine Lee Bass, who has passed from our midst, to offer love and support to her family, and to proclaim a message of faith and hope. This room is filled with a plethora of emotions at this very moment. And just as each of you is bringing to this place different feelings, you each also bring with you an impression that Miss Catherine has made upon you. The unique relationships and stories of her life that only you get to tell and share, or that only you know as a reflection of her, that come together to create a complete reflection of this truly amazing woman. Through each of your memories and the retelling of stories, she will be able to live eternally in heaven, but also in our hearts. Psalm 62:5 reads, "Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from him." Let us pray. God of rest and peace, what an honor it is to know this amazing gift that you have given us in the form of Sarah Catherine Bass. As we reflect together today on her life during this service and sacred time, help us to see that the way that she has lived truly reflects your presence in the world. Through a life of service in which she made sure all people were taken care of, ensuring that everyone around her in her home, in the hospital, and in her community was looked after and provided access to loving care. Show us today, God, what heaven looks like. Remind us of the gentle and comforting love that awaits us once we too pass through this life and enter into eternity with you. An eternity in which there is no more pain, no more suffering, and in which all joy and zeal for being is restored. Thank you, God, for the ability to reach out to you and to use our earthly existence to glorify and honor you in all things, just as we have seen in the life of the one who has come home and experienced your truly amazing grace. Amen.
Sarah Catherine Lee Bass was the youngest child of Susan Hollowell and Elder Junius B. Lee. A primitive Baptist preacher is in our history. Hard benches, long sermons, multiple preachers, and dinner on the ground. You young people need a lesson on that sometime when I'm around. Catherine was the valedictorian of her class at Fort Oaks High School. Then education at Wake Forest, when the college was in Wake Forest and influenced by Baptist rule. After she completed the medical part of her education, she started on the path of her chosen vocation. She did lab work for doctors in hospitals along the way. She gained a lot of other medical knowledge every day. We all ask her for advice on our aches or pain. Sometimes saving us a doctor's bill was our game. In 1960, Catherine became a Bass and moved to the Bass Road location. During these years, she kept house, cooked, reared children, and worked at her vocation. She and James worked hard to build a good home on the family farm. Their 3 children reflect their character and southern charm. Much of the food was grown on the family farm. A year without a big garden and a hog killing was cause for alarm. Karen, Roger, and Janet, she guided you to be the adults you are today. She left this world with the assurance that you'd be okay. A mama cat, the kind with 4 legs and fur, looks after her offspring, whatever may occur. Our cat looked after others most of her adult years. She was always there for others when there was sickness or tears. Grandma Della and Grandpa Bert knew they could depend on Cat. Many of you already knew that. She looked after our Aunts Lois and Bernice in their final years and provided comfort and peace. Neighbors in Bentonville knew that Cat would provide food, love, and care. When there was a need, she was always there. She gave of herself to do things for others. She did it because she loved her Christian sisters and brothers. At this church, she was active in so many ways. She helped with meals and services on special days. For the last few years of her earthly body went on a downward decline as she was getting old. Doctors, medication, sickness, and confinement took its toll. She didn't wallow in self-pity or protest what had to be done. At Bella Rose, she trusted the care given by doctors, nurses, 2 daughters, and her son. She faced each health issue with grit and determination. Her bounce-back ability serves as an inspiration. We were all blessed to have Mama Cat as a mother, a grandma, an aunt, a neighbor, and a friend. Let's resolve today that her legacy will not end. Let's put our shoulders to the proverbial plow. We can do it because Mama Cat showed us how.
Lasted all those years. disappear somehow. You said your sweet goodbyes, on your knees you cried, you're still asking why. But blue has never been bluer, true has never been truer. Honey never tasted so sweet. There's a song in the breeze, a million voices of praise. A rose has never smelled redder. The sun has never been brighter. If I could find the right words to say, if you could look at my face, if you could just see this place, you wouldn't cry for me today. What you think you see isn't really me, 'cause I'm already home. You've got to lay down, 'cause Jesus holds me now, and I am not alone. Your faith is wearing thin, but I am watching him, and he is holding you too. How blue has never been bluer, true has never been truer. Honey never tasted so sweet. There's a song in the breeze, a million voices of praise. A rose has never smelled redder. The sun has never been brighter. If I could find the right words to say, if you could look at my face, if you could just see this place, you wouldn't cry for me today. You wouldn't cry for me today. Oh, what made me cry years will just be a moment. Oh, the day will come when I'll show you where you're going, and I can't wait to show you that blue has never been bluer, true has never been truer. Honey never tasted so sweet. There's a song in the breeze, a million voices of praise. A rose has never smelled redder. The sun has never been brighter. If I could find the right words to say, if you could look at my face, if you could just see this place, you wouldn't cry for me today. 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 You wouldn't cry for me today.
Selections from Proverbs 31 read, a wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night. She provides food for her family. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hand to the needy. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. To be understood as a Proverbs 31 woman is to be greatly revered in the community by many, by those who admire and look up to you. Now, it's not very often that you run across someone who truly checks off every aspect of what this passage tells us it takes to be praised. But Mrs. Catherine, she certainly did. A wife of noble character, who can find? The passage begins. Well, I'd say Mr. James Lee certainly found one. She took on, without question, loving him, and loving the two young children, Roger and Karen, that came along with him. She loved him and cherished him, and they welcomed their own little bundle of joy, Mrs. Janet, into the world. And Mrs. Catherine spent her days caring for her little family, making sure that James Lee never had to ask for anything, and adoring him at all times in all things, constantly seeking out ways to show him that he was loved. To her children, she was a mama that could not be matched by any other. She was a mama who supported any endeavor her children wanted to take on, and acted as their advocate in the world and to their daddy, the bullet who could tame the bull. She took care, too, of extended family, inviting her sister into their home to be given constant care for 10 years, caring for James Lee's parents and many others here in this area. Living out this Proverbs text, she would work in the night, or rather the wee hours of the morning, I was told, picking peas to be certain that her family's mouths and livelihood was kept full, living always into the calling upon her servant heart to provide. Yet not only did she serve her family, but this wonderful Proverbs woman also served everyone that she encountered. And this place here at Mill Creek was no exception. She began her service here in the 60s when she married Mr. James Lee, and she continued it until she simply could not anymore, never missing a Sunday or a revival or any event at all. Raising her little family here, with James Lee always wanting them here too, and it's a good thing that they forgave Karen for breaking her streak on her little pen, so this whole family could gather here once again today. Mrs. Catherine took on the roles of cleaning this church, of making it look wonderful for services on Sunday or preparing it for moments like this one, where we gather here in the sanctuary to celebrate and honor members of this faith community. She also helped to prepare communion and to ensure that on Sunday mornings, the mouths of many were met with the blessing of Jesus Christ. She made it so that those mouths were met with the blessing of that bread and cup. She fed not only by offering that communion and that blessing and nourishment, she was also the first to feed and provide for families who were grieving or experiencing a tragedy. A provider in so many ways. But I find that one of her sweetest attributes is that Janet told me she was the queen of the cake auctions. Now that tickled me pretty good, just like it did you. She would make sure that those cakes were delicious and perfect, so they were so sought after that she could raise a good portion for a noble cause or for this church. Dr. Cat, healing through love and food, did not only serve her family or this place though, but she also served as a nurse, caring for patients and helping them to feel that they would not be in their current state of suffering for long. An educated woman, having her bachelor's degree in medical lab technology, she ensured that every gift that the good Lord provided to her was not left unchanneled or unused. She lived out a Christian life and truly an image of the servant, Jesus Christ. She left no person uncared for or abandoned, inviting every person to meet at the table, nourishing them in whatever way that they needed. Scripture says that a woman to be revered is clothed in purple linen. And today we see Mrs. Catherine wearing a beautiful lavender that she loved, foreshadowing just how respected and loved her whole life would be. Now, Mrs. Catherine did never want anything fancy. She cared more about the deeper and more spiritual stuff, other ways of experiencing wealth, by having a full heart and a full relationship with everyone she encountered so she could be rich in love and rich in the spirit. She was selfless, and her main goal in life was to be sure that she had served well. In the spirit of that service, she would certainly want it to live on, even after she is gone, and each one of you before me today. Mama Cat would want you to learn one thing from her, if nothing else. She would want you to leave this place today in love and kindness, carrying on her legacy of servanthood. Now, just as it was an honor for her to serve others, it was truly my honor to get to serve Mrs. Catherine. To meet her at Bella Rose, bring her communion, hear her laugh, and share in her stories, and get to know her in my own special way. I may not have known her in the active ways that were shared with me that I shared with you today, but I certainly knew her in a very special and dear way. Now, as a cardinal lover myself, and one that truly believes that whenever one comes to see you, it is someone very special visiting you. I loved to get to birdwatch with her during lulls in conversation and learn about the many unique aspects of many birds from Janet. That room, it may have been simple, but it was a truly magical place where I felt the Spirit every time I entered into it. Now, the last night that I was there, as we sat talking, while someone did some adjusting for Mrs. Catherine, I looked out that window at the bird feeders so expertly placed, and they were full of cardinals. There were 3 males and 2 females. And now I truly believe that one lone male was Mr. James Lee, coming to collect the love of his life, to fly away together to God's celestial shore, to fly away that they could come back one day and visit Janet, and visit Karen, and visit Roger, and visit everyone gathered here whenever they felt they may need it. I know that they are dancing through the skies and singing loud praise songs on their journey to be with the Lord and to take this final rest together. Now, Mrs. Catherine, when I would come after dinner, would always be just about to take a left turn. A nap, as she'd say. So, Mrs. Catherine, I hope that this final left turn leaves you feeling the greatest rest that any of us could ever.
Hello. I use these very often, so if I'm not loud enough, I can scream. Because sometimes that's what I feel like doing. Not so long ago, a lot of us here were attending the funeral of our beloved neighbor, Miss Nellie Westbrook. She and Mama were of the same age, and both were the finest examples of Southern, hard-working Christian women and mothers that you could ever have known. As Karen and I listened to Becky as she spoke about her mother, we both couldn't help but think that a lot of what she said could just as easily have been said about our mother. So much so that I was tempted to call Becky and ask her could I just reread it here today. Been a whole lot easier just to add a little here, take a little there, than having to start with a blank page and find my voice, stand before you now and tell you about my mom, our mom. 90 years is a lot to cover, but with every year that passed, I began to realize that no one knew her better, and no one else would rise to the challenge like one of her own. So forgive me if I falter, or go too fast, or too long, but I can promise you I will not faint, or fail to finish the task, because that's not how she and James Lee raised us. Begin at the beginning, right? Sarah Catherine, was a knee baby. You've already heard a lot of this from Sue and Jessica. She was a knee baby born in the Depression year of 1931. Father was a primitive Baptist preacher, and Grandma thought she was through having, thought she was past, she'd had the change of life, thought she was through having babies. But Mama came, the youngest of 7 that would grow to adulthood, closest sibling being Dot, who was 8 years old when she was born. The oldest of the Lee children was Lois, born 20 years earlier. Lois, Everett, Bernice, JB, Cyrus, and Dot were all grown and mostly gone by the time Mama was just 10 years old. Everett stayed and took over the family farm, while JB and Cyrus both joined the Navy. Bernice became a school teacher, Lois a banker's executive assistant, and Dot a nurse. Kat was a daddy's girl and loved to accompany him when he would travel to the various eastern North Carolina primitive Baptist congregations he served. She made lifelong friends along the way, particularly in the Williamston area. She was a smart, engaging young lady, actively involved in 4-H, and one of her projects there would spark a lifelong interest in canning and cooking and food preparation. Back in those early years, the 4-H Head, Heart, Hands, and Health Pledge became a lifetime influencer for a lot of young people, and she followed the creed. I pledged my head to clearer thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living for my club, my community, my country, and my world. In high school, she was an honors student, class of 1950, and served as a class officer in each of her 4 years and as class president in her junior year. She went on to attend Wake Forest University and Bowdoin Gray School of Medicine and had a job being held for her at Sampson County Memorial Hospital when she graduated with a bachelor's degree in medical lab technology. Doctors and nurses and patients all loved her. She was a efficient, thorough in her profession, and the standard was set pretty high for all those phlebotomists who came in search of her veins throughout her later years. She always enjoyed telling them how back in the day when she not only had to do the sticking, but also had to reuse her needles and syringes, unlike today with all things being disposable. She resharpened the needles, used an autoclave to get them sterile, and would sit for hours looking in the microscope, counting all those different blood cells, providing vital information to the doctors. Now all those things are automated, and a degree in lab technology very different than it was then. When she first started her career, she lived in housing provided for nurses, a lot like a college dorm. She took the bus to get home when she could, and with the help of her sister Lois, she bought her very first car, a brand new white and turquoise blue 1956 Chevy Bel Air. Hot mama, hot car. She stayed in touch with all of her brothers and sisters and somehow managed to keep up with their lives, even in the days of no cell phones and no internet, when handwritten letters and the U.S. Postal Service truly served. She took time off to care for Michael and Susan while Dot and husband Frank were ushering Chuck into the world in 1957. Frank, a CPA, would later serve her well by helping with filing her personal income taxes and those of hers and Daddy with all the different business elements of farm operation taxes. Frank taught her to keep every receipt, to be a record keeper, and to write it all down. She would drive to Whiteville, North Carolina to visit her brother J.B., who after serving in the Navy became a lawyer and married a lawyer, who was the daughter of a lawyer, and wait for it, they had a son who also became a lawyer. Before that son, Junius B. Lee III, they blessed her with niece Helen, and after him, with nephews Kenny and Robert. Her brother Everett and wife Lou moved into the home place where she was raised and blessed her with niece Sue, who was born when Mama was only 12 years old. She would be followed by Phil and Jane. Cyrus, like J.B., had sailed the seas with the U.S. Navy, but he went a little further and brought home a bride from Perth, Australia. Si and Roma gave her 3 more nephews, Gary, Steve, and Jeff. Lois and Bernice were never married, and they, like Mama, loved each and every one of their nieces and nephews. Mama cherished her time with them, not only when they were young, but also as they grew into adults and had children of their own. Lee reunions were an annual event that she organized and kept going long after many families let such traditions die. To her, they were so very important, and in her later years, when she was the only surviving member of the Doonley clan, it was a connection to all those she had loved and lost and who had gone on before her. In April of Mama's senior year in high school, her mom, Susan, succumbed to a blood clot, which resulted from a car accident that she and Doon had been in a few weeks before. One of her last memories of her mama was of her asking for a drink of water to be drawn from the north side of the well, where it was coldest. My mama loves some cold, cold water. Mama was working in Clinton in 1955 when her beloved father succumbed to kidney cancer. His second wife, Granny Lucy, returned to her Williamson family, but my mama had grown to love her in those 4 years, and especially as she cared for her daddy in his last days. The rest of her life, Mama would make regular visits to see her. Both of her parents were gone when Mama made the connection with James Lee Bass. He had also gone to 4-H school, but was several years ahead of her, and his peers were athletes, not scholars. They had never really met. Daddy had married one of her classmates, Shirley Jean Morris, a member of this church, who died tragically in the spring of that year, leaving Daddy with 2 small children. Karen, only 5, and Roger, 3. Daddy knew he needed to find a special lady who would not only be the right woman for him, but be willing to accept and love his babies. Maybe that was the real reason he decided to go to a reunion of the class of 1950, where Mama was in attendance and sparked his interest. Miss Nellie always took credit for introducing them. Let it be known that often the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Mama's contribution to that reunion was homemade strawberry ice cream, which she offered a second helping of to the greedy young widow. They began courting, and he would travel to Clinton to pick her up at the nurse's housing where she stayed. She had other suitors initially, but quickly knew where her heart was leading. At Christmas of 1959, she was spending time with him and the children, and made the first of many of his favorite made-from-scratch German chocolate cakes. They were married on June 4, 1960. Their wedding was held at Juniper Church in Blackman's Crossroads, but Mama had to get special permission to have a piano brought in for the music because Primitive Baptist congregations sang everything a cappella and never embraced musical accompaniment. She had traveled to Richmond, where Lois and Bernice lived, and they had helped find the perfect wedding dress. Dot was her maid of honor, and Karen's dress and gloves were sewn and styled by Aunt Lois to match the bride's. Even Roger was dressed to the nines, but he did have to be bribed with a promised pocket knife in order to get him to walk down the aisle as they went. He still has that knife. She and James and the children made quite a picture-perfect family that day, and for years to come, I would often ask, well, where was I? Why wasn't I in that picture? My addition to the family came in 1962. We lived in the same place that we've always lived, on Bass Road. A good farming year would allow for the house to change and expand incrementally as we grew. Our house was down a little across the road from Grandma Della and Granddaddy Bert. We saw them every day. Granddaddy and Grandma Morris were also constants in our lives, and the Morrises welcomed my mama and me as one of their own. For the first 9 years of my life, she stayed home. Then she returned to public work in 1971, joining the staff of Clinton Medical Clinic. During the ensuing years, Mama became the busiest, workingest woman you will ever meet. She somehow juggled all the responsibilities that came her way, helping Daddy with whatever was needed on the farm. She became a midwife to the sows when they needed help. The runts were brought in the house in baskets and bottle fed until they were strong enough to nurse on their own. Their vegetable gardens grew larger, and Mama was determined that no pea would be left unpicked, no ear of corn left behind, no cucumber left unpickled, and no tomato uncanned. I regret that I don't have a picture of it because she spent so much time being over in that garden. Arising early in the morning to attend to it, and once she returned to public work, she would shower, put on her uniform, go to work, only to head back to the garden when she returned. Along with the freezers of food she grew, she also grew her 3 children, attending PTA meetings and annual shopping excursions to buy school clothes, trips to Raleigh to the orthodontist for braces for all 3 of us, and often hauling a few more of Bentonville's children with her for the same tighten up your teeth appointments. Kind of makes me sore just thinking about it. But afterwards, for good behavior, we got to go to the Pizza Inn buffet. She loved pizza. She was a seemingly tireless woman, a woman in constant motion. There was no time to stop and rest. Chickens at Grandma's were laying more eggs every day, and they had to be picked up. In the summer, tobacco barns full of dry tobacco that had to be emptied before the next day's harvest. Well after the hired help had gone home, Daddy, Mama, Roger, Karen, and I would be out in the barns getting it done. Mama would make bologna or tomato sandwiches to hand to us for a quick supper while we were working. 10 minutes to scarf it down and get back to it. Even when she was sitting down, she was working. Those peas had to be shelled, farm records updated, payroll ready to cash the paychecks she'd written on Thursday night to be passed out at the end of the day on Friday. Later on, she would not awaken James, but let him sleep while she and Roger went out in the middle of the night to tie off the umbilical cords of newborn baby pigs. She supported Daddy in every way, and it was only she who could soften his edges in his strict discipline of us children. We would come to her to dry our tears or fix up our bangs and bruises. She served as the Bentonville Medical Advice Hotline, and they called her often to help. She helped to organize the phone tree used by the Bentonville Fire Department that Daddy had helped to start. When the alarm sounded, he was out the door to go fight the fire, and she was on the phone to begin the process of letting other volunteer firefighters know where they were needed. At fundraisers for both the fire department and for Mill Creek Church, her homemade cakes took on a reputation of their own. They were highly sought after and would bring top dollar when auctioned off for the occasion. Growing up in that era of dinner on the grounds, she would cook so many different things to bring to each and every church function. She made the best chili for the hot dogs during Vacation Bible School. She helped boil hundreds of eggs for the Easter egg hunt. She helped to put the Christmas tree at Christmas. My daddy's parents were in their 70s when I was born, and as they began to show their age, it was she who took on more and more of their care. When she cooked for them also and would take it to them at each meal. She saw to their every need and ultimately quit her public job to come home again to care for them when the need became a constant. My dad was the provider, but she was our nurturer. She saw me off to college, and when I came home for the weekend, sent me back with care packages full of all my favorite foods. She did the same for Karen. Truthfully, anyone who visited was likely to go home with a care package. She taught us proper etiquette, exactly where the knife and the fork went when setting the table. She taught Karen how to cook, which is good because I didn't want to learn. I was more of a tomboy, but thankfully Karen did, and Mama's legacy of delicious food will live on through her. She and Mama survived Karen's teenage years with both having tears and regrets over the battles they fought. She's a redhead in there, you can just beware. But from that, they grew a love for each other that few can truly understand or appreciate. Mama stayed in touch, and I would never go more than a couple of days without speaking to her my entire life. As I moved from home to Raleigh and Durham and Virginia and married Amanda there before bringing him to live once again in Raleigh. She and Daddy drove to Charlotte to be there for the birth of Karen's firstborn and their first grandchild, Brian. When the second one, Michael, came along, Karen was back living in Raleigh, but she had to go to the hospital with viral pneumonia not long after the birth, and Mama took on the care of not only her 4-year-old son, but also her unweaned newborn while Karen healed. She saw me through a lifetime of medical issues, including being the one to recognize the signs of my diabetes at age 12, even before the blood she drew from me confirmed her fears. Later, through issues with my own heart and multiple times spent waiting and watching for me to come out of a coma. Once she even slept on the floor of the intensive care waiting room for almost a week, never leaving me and making sure she was there when I first came back to her. She was there for Roger too. When he was about 12 years old, his appendix burst. Not knowing what the problem really was, but only that he had returned home without his pony, and that Daddy thought he had been kicked. It was she who insisted on rushing him to the hospital in Clinton, and she who told the ER nurse that her son needed immediate attention and that the problem was in his gut, not with the bruises on his face. As Roger recalls, she went off on that first day. And shortly after, Roger was rushed back for an emergency appendectomy. He never forgot how his mama's cat claws came out in his defense. Later, in his late 30s, Roger's heart was attacked by a virus, and she and Daddy were sick with worry that he wasn't going to survive. They would have signed away the farm and everything they owned to ensure he got the proper health care, but Roger wouldn't allow them to do it. He spent a month in the hospital. Thankfully, he lived because they needed him so very much, especially in the last years. It was Roger who checked in on them daily, and after Daddy's death, Mama counted on Roger to be there, to be the strong arm she needed when she failed, to help get her from bed to chair and back. to be the night watchman, ever aware if the light came on in their rooms, even as he awoke from sleep. After the demise of our grandparents, she had returned to public work at New Grove Medical Clinic, where she retired in 2001. Not long after that, her 90-year-old sister Lois moved in with Mama and Daddy, where Mama waited on and served her until her death at age 98. She would decide to put off having knee surgery herself in order to be able to take care of Lois. She put it off so long that it eventually quit even being an option, and her knees would cause her pain for the rest of her life. She was the most selfless person. She always put the needs of others before her own. Beginning with her Mama and Daddy, and then on to James's parents, and then her sister Bernice, who spent her last few years in a nursing home with advanced dementia, as Mama as her advocate and POA. She nursed them all. After James's sister Lucille retired and she and her husband George moved back into the home place, she took care of them as well. Her sister Dot was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and spent years not knowing her own family. But Mama faithfully made the trek to often visit her and Uncle Frank. She felt helpless that she could not do more for that sister, even as she took care of Lois. She helped many neighbors, but none more so than Miss Betsy Lee. Miss Betsy developed throat cancer, and it was Mama that she asked to change the dressing on that deep wound. A wound that tore at Mama's heart because she could not do more to save her friend. Even as she aged, she never seemed to tire, and it was only when she sat down and immediately fell asleep that we knew things were changing. She and Daddy looked after each other for many years. They were inseparable, except for his daily, sometimes several daily visits to C.W. Flowers' store and the weekly fire department. She and Lois never complained when Daddy only wanted to watch the news or sports. They both learned a lot about baseball and basketball that way. Somehow it seemed appropriate that in Thursday's News and Observer, her obituary landed, where they all do now, in the sports section. Lois would paint and do puzzles. Daddy would watch whatever sporting event he could find. But Mama was still getting up to load the dishwasher, clean the kitchen, wash and dry, and even iron Daddy's everyday khaki pants and shirt work clothes. It was ingrained in her being to be who she was and to do whatever was asked of her. She was a mover and a shaker, and that's why it was so terribly hard to see her own body fail her and stop her movement almost completely. Only God had enough force to stop that woman from working and allow someone else to carry on. Even as she became dependent on the wheelchair for mobility and ultimately completely dependent on others for everything, even feeding. We saw her smile fade, but still she did not complain. Her pleasures became so very simple, like having someone to push her outside and lean her chair back so she could soak up the sun, or just brush her hair. And I cannot tell you the countless hours she spent not watching sports, but watching her birds. Karen and Alan found the Taj Mahal of bird feeders to put outside her window at Bella Rose, and flocks of all kinds flew in to enjoy the feast. There was a separate feeder for hummingbirds, but there were sparrows and chickadees, bluebirds and blue jays and nuthatches and titmouses and house finches and cowbirds and turtle doves and even woodpeckers. The most beautiful yellow finches, but her favorite was the cardinals. All day long they came, and like clockwork, you could count on that big red daddy bird to show up every evening about the time her meals were served, when Karen or Alan and I were usually there to see it. Some believe that when a loved one passes, they come back to see you in the form of a cardinal. It gave her comfort to know that Daddy was checking in on her. There were so many of them at times, youngsters, both male and female, and we would joke that Daddy bought the whole Cardinal baseball team today. And sometimes there'd be a lot of females vying for his attention, and she would say, "May the best woman win." She loved my daddy with every ounce of her being, and like those cardinal birds that mate for life, no one else could ever own her heart. Her life was lived selflessly serving her husband and others. Daddy found in her not only a good wife and mother, but a woman who did not adorn herself with gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds. Her home was not filled with fine furnishings, but with love. She watched over the affairs of her household, and her hands were never idle. She exemplified a godly woman. In today's world of so many troubles and so much need, we honor her for all that her hands have done. And ask that each one of you here help us to carry on her legacy with a voice of compassion, a heart of love, and an act of kindness. May God rest her soul. We love you, Mom.
Most of the music in today's service was picked by Catherine herself, or it was simply music that they knew that she would love. And so our final song this morning will be what we all proceed out to the graveside where the service will be continued. It is Carried Away by the Gold City Quartet.